You're listening to Colorado Chamber Office Hours, a podcast that explores what matters most to business. I'm your host, Ed Sealover, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for the Colorado Chamber of Commerce and editor of the Sum and Substance. Let's get talking. Welcome back, everyone. It used to be a truism that general election races didn't really kick off until Labor Day. But that belief, much like the politics as usual that used to define our state, is dead and gone. Mail ballots will start going out to voters the week of October 2nd. That's less than 2 months from now. And if you haven't started boning up on where the candidates stand on key issues, well, I believe the time has come to do so. So today we present to you the first of 4 episodes in which we talk business issues with candidates for statewide office. And to lead off that series, we have sat down with the Republican and Democratic candidates for the Secretary of State's office. An office that is open because its current occupant, Democrat Jana Griswold, is term limited and, as you may know, is running for Colorado Attorney General, a race we hope to feature in a future episode of Colorado Chamber Office Hours. The Secretary of State's office oversees statewide elections, and the 2 major party candidates, Democrat Amanda Gonzalez and Republican James Wiley, are understandably focusing most of their campaign messaging on this important topic. But anyone who has ever owned or operated a business knows that the Secretary of State's office also is the entity responsible for all business records in the state, from initial registration to name and contact changes to trademark registrations and dissolutions. And this is not an insignificant portion of the office's job, as the filing fees for all of those transactions literally pay the cost of administrating elections in the state. So today, we want to focus on what these 2 candidates will do specifically in their role as the state's official business registration officer. We may divert a little bit to elections as well, but we want to keep this business focused for those voters concerned with those issues. First up, we have James Wiley, the Republican nominee. Wiley, known to some as the Red Flame of Liberty, for his hair color, in case you were wondering, is an election integrity activist who has been involved in legal actions against everyone from Dominion voting systems to Secretary Griswold to his general election opponent, Amanda Gonzalez. James, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me here.
Thank you. To start off with here, in just a minute or less, could you tell us why you want to be Colorado's next Secretary of State?
Well, over the course of my lifetime, particularly this decade, I've watched the relationships and the glue that holds our country together unfortunately deteriorate over time. I believe that is a symptom of a loss of trust. And the greatest source of trust that we have in the country is the method of elections that we provide to our citizens. And improving that trust can improve the opportunity to restore those relationships and make politics the fun game without the divisiveness and toxicity that it's become.
Excellent. All right, now we may come back to election issues, but I want to start this conversation with a focus on business issues, which seems appropriate because on your website, you list one of your goals broadly as wanting to use your office to make it faster and cheaper to launch and grow businesses in this state. How exactly do you plan to do that?
Well, I've been working with small businesses for decades. I believe in capitalism. I believe in the free market, and that being the key to wealth and prosperity and the rise of the free market across the world over the last several centuries has proven to be the most beneficial thing to humanity ever. And we can continue that process in Colorado, but we need to get the government out of the way as much as possible and support small businesses, support entrepreneurs, people who want to invest in our community. And the key to that is making their life easy. The hours that they spend interacting with the Secretary of State takes away from the hours that they're serving their customers and building our economy here in Colorado. So I want to make that as easy as possible for them, including specifically automatic renewal on your business registration. I think that's something that we can offer citizens across the state of Colorado that will encourage them to start and continue their businesses.
Well, that's an interesting idea that I don't think has been brought up before in this race. I know that in past races, there have been a lot of talk about the fees that businesses pay for filing documents with the Secretary of State's office. Everything from $50 to register to $100 for reinstatement to $10 to change their names. While you're talking about businesses, do you feel like those fees are fair? Do we need to look at raising or reducing them or streamlining them in some way?
Unfortunately, in the state of Colorado, the fees have been exempted from the limits of Tabor, and Tabor is something put in place to protect the citizens. And so we need to find other ways to pull back the fees and restrain those as much as possible. Let's look at the purpose of that. It's really to have a financial transaction to verify that the individual who is making the filing with the Secretary of State's office is who they say they are. We don't need these fees to be overly burdensome to the point that people hesitate on pursuing filings or hesitate on their registration or getting their business back into good standing. $100 to set aside the delinquency status on your business is far too much. We need to make it easy for people to have and continue their businesses while at the same time preventing India or Pakistan from bringing in hundreds of thousands of fraudulent business filings, which it needs to be balanced out. So I want to reduce fees as much as possible while also preventing that kind of fraud.
Excellent. Now, the fees, as long as we're talking about them, also fund elections, which is a use that the National Federation of Independent Business unsuccessfully sued to stop earlier this decade, claiming it was a diversion of money for an unrelated purpose. Do you think business fees should continue to fund elections in the state, or do we need to look for other sources of revenue for that important purpose and similarly other ways to use the business fees?
Well, there will always need to be some source of revenue for the Secretary of State's office, and elections being the primary function of that office. There will need to be some costs attributed to some form of revenue. So I understand that there needs to be some fees in place just to keep the lights on in this building, for example. I know the Secretary of State's office being next door was cool to stop by for a selfie. But the important thing with the cost of the elections also needs to be brought down. If we're going to be reducing the fees, we need to reduce the cost of elections, or both at the same time. It needs to be a parallel effort. And we can reduce costs by reducing complexity, improving the simplicity. And simplicity is genius. And it's not my genius, it's the genius of the past and the elections that have been conducted in the past and the simplicity behind those. Really, the cost goes down when you decentralize elections. And that's my goal.
Excellent. And just for anybody who's confused about that last interaction, we at the Colorado Chamber of Commerce are on the same floor as the Secretary of State's office downtown. Now, you talked about securing records here, and obviously part of what the fees pay for is the cybersecurity system that protects business records. You've made it a focal point of your campaign to say you want to place all of those records on a blockchain ledger to protect them better. What, in your opinion, isn't working right now as far as record protection goes, and how would blockchain improve that?
Well, blockchain is a technology that is built on trust. It's a system of trust, and that system of trust so far has been applied largely to money, to currency. But it could be applied to other databases. Currency being a database, we could also apply the blockchain technology to the database that the Secretary of State maintains. But both for business filings and records there, but also for voter registration, other databases that fall under the scope of the Secretary of State's office. It's really important that we not just do our best to make sure that things are secure, but offer the opportunity for the public who we answer to verify these things. And the blockchain allows that. The blockchain opens it up for the public to check, to verify through cryptographic hashes the exact entries within the chain and that they were legitimately made. And no changes have taken place by compromise of the Secretary of State, either internally or through the security system being breached. Those can be audited and controlled for when the blockchain is used and made available to the public.
How much is that going to cost to put things on blockchain?
Well, we're already starting to develop the technology, and we want to produce it as an open source option for Secretary of States around the country for anybody who wants to hold their government accountable and make their government more transparent and accessible to the people. This will be the first experiment. This Secretary of State's race, is the first time we're bringing this technology to bear, and I am excited to be able to apply it further for the purpose of liberty, as opposed to, say, central bank digital currencies, which is an application for the purpose of tyranny.
Okay. Um, Speaking of kind of what's been going on, what needs to change here, one way in which Secretary Griswold tried to make her office more business focused was in launching an intelligence center featuring business data that people could look up or could pay to get reported to them weekly or monthly. She also partnered with the CU Leeds Business School to issue a quarterly report on business indicators. I'm curious, your thoughts on this, and if elected, will you continue these efforts, or are there ways to improve them or better ways to inform the business community?
Well, I love that you're asking about this specifically from the angle of the Chamber of Commerce, because that seems to really overlap with some of the goals and objectives of your constituents, of your members at the Chamber of Commerce, ensuring that businesses have the resources and the information that they need to be able to succeed. And I think making the databases and the vast amount of information that the government collects on a daily basis about the businesses and about the consumers and the economic trends within the state, making those accessible to the public is the right path. And I want to further those partnerships as well as increase transparency and like GitHub, get all of our data up there for people to access and use for the benefit of the public. Those things, of course, that don't violate privacy protections.
Do you feel it is up there now, or do you feel changes need to be made to give it more transparency and more accessibility?
There's always modernizations that could take place with the Secretary of State's website and with the other resources that are presented to the public. We see some of those being maybe a few decades behind. For example, when you want to access information about campaign finance, that database tracer maybe could use an update, a modernization. And so some aspects, I don't want to criticize the entire thing because there is a lot of value that's built in there, but we want to continue the march towards that modernization and for the continued accessibility, so we can provide our government as transparently and as conveniently to the people for their own review, for their own accountability, and to pursue transparency, and for the purposes which they have in interacting with the state, whether business filing or if they want to get a license for charitable gaming, that those processes save them time compared to in the past. So it's always optimizing for the benefit of that consumer, our customer, the voter.
Okay. Okay, excellent. Now that we've discussed ideas, I want to dip into your background a little bit. And while voting integrity and support for capitalism obviously are passions of yours, the job requires someone to know how to run elections and to know how to run a complex business registration database. What makes you qualified to do that?
Yeah, so the election space is something that I've been focused on from a legal perspective for the last 6 years, working on different lawsuits from Dominion Class Action, which launched in 2020, to the Colorado Recount Coalition, which formed and filed 4 different lawsuits in 2022. I was a plaintiff on the BIOS password lawsuit in 24. So I've been adjacent to the elections, observing them and watching for misconduct from election officials and looking to hold them accountable. And I believe that the next step is to move into the position of the Secretary of State's office and begin that reform and that accountability from within, and empower the clerks to be able to lead their own elections and decentralize the process. And so it's my perspective, my scrutiny, and the work that I've been doing for 6 years. This is the continuation of that, making sure the government is held accountable and the people are empowered, the clerks are empowered to the greatest extent possible. With the business side of things, I'm a little bit of a nerd, a little bit of an IT guy, so I appreciate the fact that this office definitely brings in more of the secretarial administrative component. So I'm excited to be involved in that process, and to see how we can use technology rather than in elections per se, where it actually reduces trust. We can use that technology in our databases, our business databases, to improve trust.
Okay, and you kind of segued into this, but I want to hit you on elections here real quick. Business people pay fees, but they also vote in elections. So you want to see big changes in the way elections are run in this state, and correct me if I'm wrong on what I've interpreted from your website here, including the elimination of mail-in ballots replaced by paper ballots cast at precinct polling places on a single day. Why is that? What is it about Colorado's elections that require that massive shift, do you think?
In Colorado specifically, but nationally as well, we've gone from a place where there was, at a time, a great consensus over the method of our elections. Not a lot of disagreement about how it was conducted or the results, therefore. Of course, people disagreed about who won or lost and wanted their person to win, but that was always a 50-50 position. Now we've come to a place where we used to have consensus about the method, and now we don't. In fact, there's a considerable disagreement. When you have that disagreement, you have loss of trust and accusations of cheating on both sides. Not 2020, but also 2016. Take 2000, for example, Florida, hanging chads, Jeb Bush, the governor of Florida, being the brother of the president. So there's questions we've had for a long time. And the more that we add complexity to our election process, the more we reduce the trust and erode the fabric of our society and the relationships that we have with people of different political perspectives than ourselves. We can restore that trust, we can restore our relationships, and America can have another 250 years.
Is there any worry that in kind of getting rid of some of that complexity, you also get rid of some of the accessibility, some of the convenience that some Coloradans now point out when they have mail-in ballots?
There is some convenience there that will be sacrificed and substituted also for the convenience of it being at the precinct level conveniently within your neighborhood. So there is an exchange that takes place, but ultimately the goal that we have as what we should be pursuing and optimizing for with an election process, it isn't convenience, it's trust. And I think we've lost sight of that primary focus. Of course, it should be accessible as possible. The Article 2 of the Colorado Constitution is free and open elections, and we need to maintain that, but not at the cost of the trust. So I think those two things can be balanced and brought back into focus.
Excellent. James Wiley, Republican nominee for Colorado Secretary of State. Thanks so much for sharing these thoughts with us.
Appreciate you having me on.
Joining us now is Amanda Gonzalez, the Democratic nominee for Secretary of State. Amanda is currently the Jefferson County Clerk and Recorder. Before that, she served as the Executive Director of Colorado Common Cause, a voting rights and election protection organization. Amanda, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's great to see you.
Thank you. Well, as I asked your opponent to do, could you just tell us in a minute or so why you are running to be Colorado's next Secretary of State?
Yeah. Running to be Colorado's next Secretary of State because the Secretary of State's office oversees two key pieces that are essential to Colorado's future. The first, of course, is the health of our democracy. And the second is the ability for people to start and grow businesses in the state, which is why I'm excited to be chatting with you today.
Well, that's great. You're segueing really easily into what we want to talk about, and we will come back to election issues, but I want to pivot first to business issues. One of your stated priorities is making government work for people who use it, and one of the goals you list for that is to streamline business filings. So I'm curious, as you've looked at the Secretary of State's office, what's inefficient about the current business filing system, and how would you like to change that?
So I will say, as I've chatted with folks throughout the state, they generally do tell me that online system of registering your business or filing forms is pretty straightforward and easy to use. I will say some of the criticism that I have heard is around accessibility for folks that English might be their second language, and we have a lot of newcomers to the state that start and grow businesses here, which I think is great. So I want to make sure that every business owner has the resources that they need and the help that they need to work with the Secretary of State's office. You might not know this about me, but I was the CEO of a small business for a handful of years, and we were exactly the wrong size. In that, it was about $4.5 million in revenue every year, but that meant I had staff, but I was an HR department of one, a marketing department of one, a compliance department of one. And so, you never want to miss your filing fees and have to pay those late fees. And so we should just make it as easy and friction-free as possible for businesses to comply with laws.
Okay. And actually, I did know that about you,
Okay.
but I'm going to come back to that a little bit later because I
Yeah.
want to know more.
Yeah.
But I want to stick to filing for a second because when folks file, of course, business officers must pay fees. And we'll go through again what those fees are. But some people question the fees. Do you feel the fees are fair? Should they be increased? Should they be decreased? How do you view what people are paying to interact with the Secretary of State's office?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right question because sometimes that question is phrased as too much or too little. And really, the question that we should be asking is, does the office have the resources it needs to serve businesses, to serve community, to serve Colorado? And that is probably a question that we have to ask ourselves on an ongoing basis because costs in the state change, needs change. And so right now they do seem about right to me, but that's somebody who's currently the clerk and recorder in Jefferson County, and I'm an expert on the ins and outs of the office over there. But this is something that we should look at on a regular basis.
And I don't know, I've never thought to look into this, if Jefferson County uses filing fees for different things than the Secretary of State's office statewide does. But I know there had been some questions in the past, including a 2022 lawsuit that got dismissed, about whether or not the fees that businesses pay money should be used to fund elections. What are your thoughts on that? Is that the best way to fund elections? Do we need to look for a different source? And alternately, do we need to look for a different way to use business filing fees?
Mm-hmm. Very reasonable question, right? It shouldn't be one sector of the population that is paying for a public good. And of course, elections are a public good, and individuals and businesses have an interest in stability in that process. So it has been the case that the Secretary's office has largely not been funded out of the general fund, but instead from the cash fund within the office. There's a lot of good reasons for that. One of those is that it insulates the office in part from the political shenanigans that might be happening at the Capitol. And all of us have an interest in that stability. We shouldn't see funding for that office come and go depending on the political winds. And like I said, you have exactly the right question, is there a subset of our population within Colorado that is paying a disproportionate amount? And is that the right policy for the state? So I think it's reasonable. But again, the bigger question is, how do we make sure that we have fair, transparent processes and a Secretary of State's office that has stability that people can rely on?
And so it was a good way to walk through it. But I mean, do you think then that we need to look for a different approach to that? Or do you feel like it is fair right now?
Yeah, I think it's complicated. I know that's a little bit of a political answer, but that's because these policies are complicated. And, we have a situation with Colorado's funding structure generally and how we fund the policies and programs that constituents need that is hamstrung by Tabor. And so we have to take all of that into account when we look at how do we make sure that we're meeting all of the needs of the state.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to go down the Tabor rabbit hole right now. But speaking of complex, I mean, we've talked about what you charge for the filings, how you streamline them. Big part of your role, though, at least in regard to business, is keeping those records secure, particularly so that sensitive information on them can't be stolen and used for purposes like obtaining fraudulent loans.
Yes.
Is the cybersecurity system around business records as safe as it can be right now as you look at this, or is there any sort of upgrade that's needed?
We constantly need to be looking at technology, right? It is changing every second. And so that question of, is it good enough? The answer is yes, because we have a highly qualified staff at the Secretary of State's office that is working on this day in and day out. And we can never rest on our laurels, right? Just because it is safe and secure today doesn't mean that we don't need to stay vigilant and that we don't need to make updates on the regular. And so yes, safe and secure, and we absolutely have to stay vigilant and stay on top of this.
In other words, ask you the question again in 2 more years when there may be new technology that can keep it more safe and secure.
Absolutely. And that's the responsibility of any good government office that serves the public, is to have modern technology, not only because it's so essential to security, but also because that is what makes processes easier on the public, is when you have modern technology and infrastructure that's serving them.
Certainly. Secretary of State's office also, and another connection to the business community here, offers an intelligence center that allows people to look up business data or have reports sent to them. Partners with CU Leeds Business School to issue a quarterly report on business indicators. Are these good uses of the office's resources? And do you think they're providing valuable information, or could that information be improved?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a similar answer to the last question in that we constantly need to be improving. In my current office, we actually created a director of innovation position because we constantly need to be learning. We constantly need to be doing better. And, as somebody that was the former CEO of a small business and somebody who runs a large government organization now, I know that I am constantly relying on data. I don't want to make decisions that are based on vibes.
It's probably a good plan. I'm curious, how have you used that director of innovation position? What kind of things have come out of that?
Yes. So we have been, I talk a lot also about my belief in big and little d democracy. I really believe that we make better decisions when we have all different perspectives around a table. And I will admit that I have made some boneheaded decisions in the past when I've run organizations because the table wasn't broad enough. And so here's one where I love to be wrong. So I not only oversee elections for nearly 500,000 voters, but I also oversee 5 motor vehicle offices. And I am really proud to say that we have more than 10,000 reviews on Google, and we have 4.8 stars. Who reviews a DMV, let alone positively, right? And so
Right, that's normally the people who just had to wait 3 hours and want to complain to somebody about it.
we have less than a 5-minute wait time at our DMV. And that, is the same philosophy that I will take to the Secretary of State's office, is that government should serve people and they shouldn't have to think about it, right? It should just make them feel welcome and help them get their needs done. And so one of the things that that innovation director has worked on is actually a chatbot. I don't know about you. I don't love chatbots. I hate interacting with them, and I thought that I was representative of everyone. Turns out I'm not. Lots of people love those, and it is not utilizing AI in that it's going out to the internet to find answers, right? It's a closed system that's only working from information that we've given it. But the reality is it has really cut down on the number of times that customers have to make a call to the office to get information. They get served quicker. It's reduced the amount of mail that we get to the office to process, and ultimately saved the clerk and recorder's office money. And so it's been both a really good thing for our constituents and also for the office. Folks are getting what they need faster. So that was one of the projects that I've been really proud of.
Interesting. It'll be interesting to see if you're elected, how that comes to bear in the statewide dealings. You mentioned this, but I want to come back now and I want to delve into your background in 2 ways. First of all, your website, and you mentioned you run a small business, and I could not find, as much as I poked around on the internet, what that business was. So tell us about what it was and how does that impact the way that you approach dealing with businesses in your current and possibly future job?
Yeah. So I was a CEO in the cannabis industry for a handful of years. It was actually the family business. And it was such a good experience. Those were some of the years where policy around cannabis in Colorado was really growing rapidly and really changing rapidly. And so, I understand how hard that is as a business owner. I really do believe that the vast majority of people want to do the right thing, whether they're business owners or whether they're volunteers at their kids' school, right? We're showing up because we're part of a community and we want to do well. And it was often very hard. I'm an attorney, right? Thank goodness, because I was reading laws and having conversations with other attorneys about intent and compliance and what does this look like and what structures do we need. And so for the business owners that were trying to do the same thing that I was doing, which is keep up with all these changing laws, I think that is really, really difficult if you didn't have the same background that I did.
Okay. Obviously, the other part of your background here, you've overseen elections on a county level, but does that experience translate to overseeing statewide elections? And what do you say to critics, such as your general election opponent, who question the way you've run those elections on a county level?
Interesting. So, I think my background really sets me up well to be Colorado's next Secretary of State. As the executive director of Colorado Common Cause, I was instrumental in crafting policy that governs a lot of our elections today. So helped write the law that created automatic voter registration at our DMVs that has now registered more than 800,000 Coloradans. I helped write the law that dramatically expanded the number of drop boxes in the state, which is the preferred way for most Coloradans to vote. I also wrote the law that dramatically expanded the number of counties that have to translate their ballots. So I've been protecting and defending our democracy for most of my career. As the Jefferson County Clerk and Recorder, as I said, I oversee elections for nearly 500,000 folks. So I've been on the policy side, and I've also been on the side of actual implementation. And so sometimes when I think about the relationship between clerks, who are the folks that are on the ground actually administering the elections, they're the ones that are laying out your ballot, making sure you get the right one in the mail, hiring the election judges, making sure those ballots get accurately counted. I think of clerks sort of as classroom teachers. They're the ones on the ground making sure that the work gets done. And then I sometimes think of a Secretary of State almost as a principal, making sure that policies are in place, making sure they're being followed, making sure that the folks on the ground have the resources, the training, and the support that they need. And, in cases of something going poorly, accountability. And I don't know about you, but I love principals who have had some classroom experience.
Okay. Lastly, while we've been hyper-focused on business, I don't want to ignore your big picture campaign message, which is centered on defending voting rights and ensuring democracy. What does that mean for Colorado elections? And are there changes that need to be made? Or are you looking to come in and ensure that what we have now continues to work in largely the same way?
Yeah. Our elections really are some of the strongest in the entire nation. And that's illustrated by the fact that we have some of the highest turnout in the country. And ultimately, that is the entire goal. I want to make sure that every eligible voter is able to cast their ballot and have that ballot accurately counted. I come from a nonpartisan background where, I will fight like hell to make sure that every eligible voter can actually have their voice heard, whether you agree with me or you don't politically, right? Like the one thing that we should be able to agree on is a fair and free democracy. And so that's why I'm here.
Amanda Gonzalez, Democratic nominee for Colorado Secretary of State. Thanks for coming in and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's all for this episode of Colorado Chamber Office Hours. Once again, I'm Ed Sealover, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for the Colorado Chamber of Commerce and editor of the Sum and Substance. I'll keep the conversation going at tsscolorado.com, and we'll see you next time as we explore the issues that matter most to business.